Everyone knew Dolores Keane had passed away, but no one expected what would happen at her funeral. Because when Catherine Connolly spoke, the entire meaning of her life and legacy suddenly changed. It happened on a quiet Friday afternoon inside a church in Galway where people gathered for what they thought would be a simple farewell. But from the very beginning, something felt different, like this wasn't just about saying goodbye. The news had already spread days earlier that Dolores Keane had passed away at the age of 72. She died peacefully at her home in Catherine, but the reaction that followed was anything but quiet. Because this wasn't just another artist, this was a voice people had grown up with, a voice tied to memory, culture, and identity. And yet, many people outside that world still didn't fully understand why her loss felt so heavy. She wasn't someone constantly in headlines, she wasn't chasing attention, and she didn't build her legacy through noise. Instead, she built it slowly, through something far more powerful: honesty. From a young age, her life was shaped by tradition, influenced by her aunts Rita and Sarah. That early foundation didn't just teach her music, it shaped the way she expressed emotion. As she grew older, she didn't just follow tradition, she carried it forward and quietly transformed it. Through her work with Danann and later her solo journey, she created something people could feel instantly. There was no need to explain her voice, people just understood it. And that's what made it different. It didn't try to impress, it connected. Her performances weren't about perfection, they were about truth. And over time, that truth became her identity. Projects like A Woman's Heart didn't just succeed, they became part of people's lives. Songs weren't just listened to, they were remembered, carried, and revisited in moments that mattered. But here, what made it even more interesting. Despite all of this, her legacy wasn't fully recognized by everyone, at least not until something changed. Because what happened after her death made people look at her in a completely different way. When the news broke, tributes began to appear from fans, musicians, and public figures. But one voice stood out more than all the others, and it wasn't from the music world. It came from Catherine Connolly. And what she said wasn't just a tribute, it felt like a realization. She was one of the great voices of this island and of the world. That line alone made people pause and rethink everything they thought they knew. Because this wasn't exaggeration, this was recognition at the highest level. And it raised a question that quietly spread. Had people underestimated her all along? Connolly didn't stop there. She spoke about how Dolores carried tradition, but also made it new with intelligence and emotion. And then came something even more powerful. A reference to something someone once said, that Dolores had a sacred voice. At first, that might sound like a compliment, something often said about artists. But Connolly explained it differently. It wasn't sacred because it was perfect. It was sacred because it was honest. That one idea changed how people understood her. Because honesty is rare, and when it's real, people feel it without explanation. But it wasn't just the words, it was what happened next that made this moment unforgettable. As the funeral approached, something unusual started happening. People who hadn't thought about her in years suddenly felt the need to remember. Stories resurfaced, songs were replayed, memories came back. And slowly it became clear, this wasn't just a personal loss, it was collective. The funeral was scheduled at St. Patrick and St. Cuana Church. A quiet place, but on that day, it carried a different kind of weight. At 3 p.m., people began arriving. Not in chaos, not in noise, but in silence. Family, friends, and members of the public gathered. Each person carrying their own memory, their own connection. There were no dramatic moments, no loud reactions. Just a shared understanding that something meaningful was being honored. And among those present was Catherine Connolly. Her presence alone said something without words. Because when a president attends, it signals importance. But this felt deeper than protocol, it felt personal. At the same time, outside the church, another scene was unfolding. At Galway County Hall, a book of condolences was opened by Galway County Council. People lined up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They wanted to leave something behind, a message, a memory, a thank you. And that raises an interesting question. Why do people feel connected to someone they may have never met? The answer slowly became clearer. Because Dolores didn't just perform songs, she reflected emotions people couldn't express themselves. And when someone does that, they become part of your life even without direct contact. And then inside the funeral, something was said that changed everything. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it carried weight. Connolly spoke again. And this time, her words didn't just describe Dolores, they defined her legacy. To all who loved her and were moved by her, and we are many. Even that line alone confirmed something important. This wasn't a small group. This was widespread, shared, and real. But then came the line that stayed with people. A voice like hers does not leave us. It moves into the air and lives forever. That was the moment. The moment everything shifted. Because suddenly, this wasn't about death anymore. It was about continuation. People didn't hear that line as poetry. They heard it as truth. And in that silence that followed, no one needed explanation. Everyone understood. That's when it became clear. This funeral wasn't marking an end. It was marking a transition. From presence to legacy. From sound to memory. From a person to something that can't be removed. After the ceremony, as people slowly left, nothing dramatic happened. No sudden reactions, no emotional outbursts. Just quiet reflection. Because sometimes, the strongest emotions don't show immediately. They stay and unfold later. As days passed, the impact didn't fade. It grew. More people discovered her music. More people revisited her work. And more importantly, more people understood what made her different. She didn't rely on trends. She didn't chase relevance. She simply stayed real. And in a world where so much feels artificial, that kind of honesty stands out. Her family, her son Joseph, her daughter Tara, her brother Sion, her sister Teresa. They weren't just mourning a public figure. They were saying goodbye to someone personal. Someone real. And yet, even in that personal loss, there was something shared. Because millions felt connected in their own way. So when people look back at that day, they won't just remember a funeral. They'll remember a realization. A realization that sometimes, we don't fully understand someone's value until we're forced to reflect. And maybe that's what makes moments like this powerful. Not just the loss, but the clarity that comes after. Because in the end, this story was never just about death. It was about recognition. Recognition of a voice that carried truth. Recognition of a legacy built quietly but deeply. And recognition of something most people overlook. That the most powerful impact doesn't always come from noise. Sometimes it comes from honesty. So yes, everyone knew Dolores Keane had passed away. But what they didn't expect was that her funeral would make people finally understand who she truly was. And maybe that's why. Even now, it doesn't feel like she's gone. Because some voices don't disappear. They stay in memory, in emotion, and in moments we don't even realize. And the real question is, was that funeral the end of her story? Or the moment it truly began?